The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the participants and do not reflect the opinions or beliefs of Marshall University, Marshall University Libraries, the Department of English, the College of Liberal Arts, Marshall University Film Studies, or HerdCon. Hello, everybody, and welcome. And this is the latest episode of Giant Bombs, exploring cinema through famous box office flops. Today, we'll be talking about the 2024 film release, Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga. I am here with Professor Ian Nolte. How are you doing, Ian?
I'm doing great.
I am Dr. Cody Lumpkin, and we're going to talk about a film that is a prequel, a continuation of an extremely, very successful film, Mad Max Fury Road from 2015 that won major awards, critical acclaim, did well at the box office, and this is a prequel or a midquel of it comes in between Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome and before Mad Max Fury Road, or happens at the same time as some of the things in I'm a little confused, and honestly, I don't really care.
You can always tell you're talking about a movie that came out in the last 10 years when you are fumbling to explain where in a fictional timeline it fits.
Yes. Or that, the film, like, I was thinking about another Warner Brothers film, Superman Returns, that had Brandon Routh, and they're like, forget that Superman 3 or 4 ever happened. Now, just remember Superman 1 and 2, and then that's Superman Returns. So it's a lot of fan casting. Even in a film like Furiosa, it is a film that is the same filmmaker who's made all of the Mad Max films. Has been the same filmmaker. What's his name? Not Oliver Miller. Suddenly, we don't have the name of it here. Who was that director? Miller. Frank. Ozzy. Do you remember the director?
No.
The director of all the Mad Max films.
Oh, George Miller.
George Miller. Yeah, I'm sorry. I get my Millers mixed up. But George Miller, certainly one of our great filmmakers. It's not a thing where he pulled like a Halloween and like John Carpenter. I made one film and then the hell with everything else.
That is true that these five films are the product of one singular director. And it's not an intellectual property that's been passed around by a corporation the way like the Superman films you just described are. And it spans from the 80s till now.
Yeah, basically 45 years. Basically, he was a younger guy. Now he's an older guy. He's an older guy, and he's still making wild films. And it's not a thing where, like, in the case of like the Star Wars franchise, he wasn't like George Lucas and made his films and then sold it for them to make other films. This has been his baby from the start.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting to see, going back to like Mad Max, which was extraordinarily low budget at the time. And I do recall that they had no permits to drive cars at fast speeds. There were just people that could have gotten run over by these car chases, to then just having just a huge amount of production entailed in making something like Fury Road and Furiosa.
Yeah, when I was looking back and reading about these films, I read that Mad Max from 1979 received a Guinness Book of World Records for having the highest box office to budget ratio at the time, like an extraordinarily cheap movie that caught on with an international audience in a huge way.
Yeah. And everything up in the next 3 films, Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, I prefer to call it that way, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, they were multitudes more in budget and production value. And then when Fury Road comes along, there's a big absence because Beyond Thunderdome came out in 1985. I remember seeing it at the theater. And then Fury Road came out 30 years later. And it definitely had adapted and started to use some of the newer cinematic techniques while still being very true to its aesthetics and emphasis on practical effects and stunts.
Do you have what are your impressions of the early Mad Max films, the 80s films?
I think The Road Warrior is a classic. I love it very, very much. It is just insane, balls to the wall. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome is interesting but unsatisfying. And I think at that time, his kind of his BFF and kind of co-creative Byron Kennedy had died, I believe, from cancer, and he was obligated to make a Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, but wasn't into it. There's actually another director who did all the dialogue scenes, and he did the action scenes. But he was kind of like his heart wasn't in it anymore because like the guy that he had gone up with in making films was no longer there.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that story about that film. George Miller is like an intensely visual director.
Yeah.
And that's always the story of the Mad Max movies is they are car chases first almost.
Yeah.
The first film, Mad Max from 1979, I never connect with that movie. I think it's possible I've never finished it. I've started it many times in my life and just never gotten to the end of it because at some point I'm like, this isn't Road Warrior.
Yeah.
And so for me, I always think Road Warrior is the one. That's the Mad Max movie, like a perfect action movie. And what you say about Beyond Thunderdome, I think always holds true. That was just my memory of them, sort of like the story of them from the 1980s was always what I carry in my mind is that like Beyond Thunderdome is like a maligned sequel to Road Warrior. Road Warrior is like the perfect action film, and Beyond Thunderdome is this like sort of like bloated, confusing story. Yeah. But I always have a lot of affection for Beyond Thunderdome.
Oh yeah, certainly.
And I think that thinking of all three of them in a row, it shows what to me is the central or core idea of what I'm looking for in a Mad Max film is it's about the desert, it's about cars in the desert, but it's going to be something completely wildly different from what you saw the last time. And the premise will kind of overlap, but the story will be new and viscerally strange from what you just saw.
Yeah, as a series, that's one of the things I appreciate about it is that it is a series that it is a series of films that has tried to do something different each time. And you know, a lot of series, however beloved they are, they do one film and they're like, that worked. Let's try to do that again, but bigger or wilder, or you know, and then they get so wild, like let's get things back down to earth. And this one has just gone increasingly bonkers. And I think with each new film, you see us farther and farther away from our civilization as we know it.
I think that's one thing that, like, because I didn't watch them in order. Like, so when I go back to Mad Max, that's one thing that always bugs me about it. It's like, oh, it's kind of like not wild like the other ones.
Yeah.
There were still a little bit
You can see
of
the big city in the distance, and they have civilization and things like that.
I like the wasteland.
Yeah. Well, there's also, so I remember seeing some sort of meme or something like that said, what if Australia, in Australia, that's what they think it is, and everywhere else is normal, just like it is, but they're just like, it's all wasteland and crazy there or something. So I do think, I think it perhaps plays into it a little bit. I mean, there's certainly a mystique about, in Australia, the mystique of the outback, or what would be referred to as the red center. Like in Australia, like the last census they did, 87% of the people in Australia live near the coast. So where Mad Max takes place, which we actually in the opening of Furiosa, we actually see where the camera goes into that middle part of Australia. There's not a lot of people there to begin with, so it could be this wild and crazy place.
Also, too, my memory of those original three Mad Max films was that Beyond Thunderdome was not, like Road Warrior was the monstrous success, and that Beyond Thunderdome was less successful. And I was really surprised to see, how much more money Mad Max made than either of those two films. And that the road that Beyond Thunderdome was a really successful box office attraction. It sold a lot of tickets, and as maybe the audiences didn't like it because it wasn't the Road Warrior Part 2, but it was a successful film for its time.
Yeah, I mean, it $10 million. This is Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. $10 million budget of 36. It probably didn't make as much money as they wanted to, but they didn't lose money in the process. And I do think this has a lot to do with Australian cinema, that Mad Max films are kind of an examples of what we would call Aussie-sploitation. There was a documentary about it once, and there's these kind of much more respectable kind of Australian art films, things like Walkabout, and from New Zealand, like the films of Jane Campion. She did a film in Australia, Sweetie. And then you have these more kind of B grade movies that are about like horror and action and just the dangers of going into the outback.
Thinking about that, I was just trying to think through that progression of like, what were these movies? When did they come out? Do you remember Fury Road being released in 2015?
Oh yeah, I went to go see it. I had sustained a terrible ankle injury from hiking, so I was limping, and I went to go see it with some friends, and we saw it. And then literally the next week, we're like all the same friends, and then some of our additional friends. I was like, y'all got to see this film.
Oh yeah.
So and then the whole thing with the guy on the guy on the guitar guy and the War Boys.
The Doof Warrior, I think is his name.
The Doof Warrior.
Yeah.
All just the Bullet Farm, just the insanity of the whole thing. It is like it's kind of this kind of era of like what we would call we've heard as like gonzo filmmaking. So you have things like a good example of this would be Aquaman. It's like just ridiculous. It's like let's fill up the screen with just we can't take ourselves too seriously, but at the same time, the Mad Max Fury Road has something to say, but is also like more than a little tongue in cheek about it.
Yeah, I remember it being released, and I was interested in it. I was at the time I was not like a major league Road Warrior fan, but those were movies I remembered fondly. I remember like seeing the marketing for it and thinking, oh, it's kind of like a Road Warrior remake. We remake movies all the time. They remade Road Warrior. All right, fine. I'll go see it. I remember being very curious about it, but not like super excited. Mm-hmm. And then going to see it, I think I saw it opening weekend, very early on when I didn't know anything about the movie. And I remember it started, and it's one of the it's rare for a film to have this effect where I was like, oh, let's see what this is. And it started, and like the first shot was so cool. Like Mad Max in the desert with the car eating a lizard. I was like, what a cool shot. And then the first sequence was so wild. I was like, what an exciting opening to a movie. And then the next sequence was better. And the next sequence was better. And the movie just keeps escalating and escalating and escalating until at the end I was like, I remember walking to my car after that movie thinking, is that the best movie I've ever seen? I can't even like articulate it in my mind just how excited I am. Yeah. And it's one that's really stuck with me from that initial viewing experience. And I did think it was a remarkable film, like a really great action sequence, but also it does, like, I think, speak to like a feeling I have, which is doesn't it seem like it's bad that we make the world more violent by letting a few people have control of resources?
Yeah.
And that, that I remember like, yeah. So like I was like, yeah, that movie I just thought that movie moved so well, so perfectly. Was very clearly about something that I'm able to think and reflect about feelings I have about concerns about the fears of violence, but also like the viscerality of violence. And I just thought, what an impressive movie. And then later I came to really appreciate like the story of it, where George Miller is this master, this older master, is returning to a form he invented, the desert car chase movie. Yeah. And I believe the story is that Fury Road, he wanted to make a sequel to Beyond Thunderdome, and he had a concept for a movie where the whole movie was the chase. Yeah. And he'd beaten that around for a while, and he got on the plane decades, I think, before the creation of the movie, from Australia to Los Angeles, and the movie came to him all in one piece, from beginning to end, and he just like made notes on the flight, and when he got off the flight, he had Mad Max Fury Road. Oh, wow. And then I think it went from that development to, I've listed all the sequences, to storyboarding, and then from storyboarding to screenplay, and then that was decades of development over time. But I just think I thought Mad Max Fury Road was like a masterpiece.
Yeah, it was. I think they did. Rotten Tomatoes, who I'm not the biggest fan of, but I guess they'd done a poll recently of best films of the 21st century, and Fury Road was rated number 1.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So
yeah.
I mean, I think there's a whole lot of affection and appreciation.
That's what I have affection for that movie, and it's all stemmed from like a theatrical experience. I went into a movie I was curious about, and it overwhelmed me, and I have fondness in my heart for it because it was so exciting.
Yeah. I mean, it is a real example of a film that is like a dare, because there's that idea of like tension and release when you tell stories. And there is a little bit of release. Oh, here they stop for a second, or there's some reflection, but it's basically like just a little bit, and then more tension, and then more build up until, they drive one way and then they drive the other way. And it is just basically the whole movie is, the whole movie is a chase scene, and something very much in line with the previous films.
Yeah.
Except on steroids.
Yeah. And the image I thought it had really daring and like, unique like images, and even like the language of it is so fun to me, like war boys and the bullet farm and these like, what is the gasoline town is like like it's huge like expansive like thing to wonder and be curious about, and engaging in that level of storytelling. I remember watching the movie the first time I watched the movie, Immortan Joe is the main villain, and that whole movie from the very beginning, I thought they were calling him Important Joe.
Oh.
And I was like, I just remember sitting in the movie theater thinking, that's the coolest name for a bad guy. He thinks he's so important, he calls himself Important Joe. And the credits came up and it said Immortan Joe. I was like, oh, never mind. Yeah. I'm not very smart.
It's still an excellent name for a villain. So
yeah, Immortan Joe is pretty good.
And I think one of the things that however you feel about the individual Mad Max movies, the villains are just outstanding. They're memorable. They're distinctive from each other, even though the same actor who played Toe Cutter in Mad Max plays Immortan Joe in Fury Road. He comes back again and plays a different character. I think it's a really good bad guy in the first one, and then he's just iconic is Immortan Joe.
Yeah, and that's one thing I think maybe I really admired about Fury Road is that I had become kind of used to like retreads and reboots and reimaginings, and I was expecting a retread of Road Warrior, and what I got was something similar but completely different, bigger in every conceptual way, more bold visually, more bold viscerally, like more bold with the character designs, and I was really impressed by the movie, where I was like, oh, they really swung for the fences.
Yeah, I think when watching, I think I remember film, like it was kind of like, this is a film I was blown away by. I think about, like whatever constitutes the first time I saw Star Wars, or I remember seeing Children of Men. And I was with someone I was dating at the time. We're like, we were going to go see The Last King of Scotland with Forrest Whitaker and James McAvoy, which is a pretty grim film. And they're like, I don't know, this seems like it's going to be too intense. Let's go see Children of Men. And that was like the wrong thing, but it was the right thing at that moment.
Oh, yeah, I think Children of Men for me was a very similar theatrical experience, where I was like, every sequence, I couldn't believe what they were doing. And it just escalated and escalated. And I just remember being in awe of what they were accomplishing with the camera in that movie.
Yeah. I mean, it is like, it's something that it kind of takes you on a journey, and you're embodied, you're kind of placed in that world, and you kind of go with it, and you don't really think about, it does what a good story, you don't want to think about anything else. And when you're done with it, you remember it, and then it comes back to you at weird times and things like that.
One thing that I have like the dates of all these movies is maybe also in my mind, I thought Furiosa was closer to Mad Max in time, but it was almost 10 years. It was 9 years between the movies, right? And when I saw it, I was like, it was 9 years between those two movies. Were you excited about Furiosa as a project?
I was initially like, dude, it's kind of how I feel about like, well, you made. Sometimes you make perfection and you don't want to mess with it.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you get lucky and you have like an amazing sequel. Like there was Alien and that was classic. And then it was Aliens. It's like that's almost as awesome. It's like stop. Or like Terminator 2. You're like you've cemented a leg. People will love these films for centuries, potentially. And I'm like, yeah, don't tempt fate. And I think of the you had like, I think Mad Max is Road Warrior is a classic, and Fury Road. So that's two, and I think all of them are worthy artistic entries, and they do something different than the obvious things. But I was kind of like, I don't know. But I certainly, when I watched trailers, I was very like excited. I was like, okay, here we go. Let's get ready to do it again.
Yeah, I was excited about it because I had that tremendous affection for Fury Road, particularly, and And like in Fury Road, it's called Mad Max Fury Road, but who cares about Mad Max? Furiosa's the awesome character. So I'm like, Furiosa movie, that's fine. And I think I carried into Furiosa that feeling that I took into Mad Max, where I was like, aha. Before I thought he would do just kind of a by the numbers retread, but he shocked me to my core, and I was like, I think he can do it again. Yeah. I think George Miller's still got it in him.
Yeah, and something he clearly cares about in his past. He's not like I'm obligated. I feel obligated.
Yeah.
Like the prequels, Star Wars prequels, I feel obligated to do this. And I think one of the things that's interesting about the Mad Max films is that just about in every case, Mad Max is a character who would prefer to not to get involved. Like, I don't want to deal with y'all. I don't want to deal with whatever problems you've had. Please leave me out of it. And he gets kind of sucked in. He is the unwilling hero. he's like reluctant squared. He doesn't want to get involved, and he ends up getting involved. But he's really kind of a side character in a larger story. He just happens to be kidnapped, or he happens this or happens that, or is doing something for money. And then he kind of becomes a major factor. And I think with Fury Road, you had genuinely like two main characters in Furiosa and Max, and then two lead characters. And I think in a lot of ways, Charlize Theron kind of really shines as that character. I mean, she's shown herself to be quite capable in action films, and this is certainly one of her best performances and one of her just absolute best action film performances.
Yeah. So I was anticipating Furiosa.
Yeah.
I was curious about it. I really wanted to see it. I didn't get around to it right away. I think it was out for a few weeks before I got to the movie theater. And in that time, I remember the big story of the release of Furiosa was the disappointing box office returns weekend to weekend. And I just looking at the numbers, like Mad Max Fury Road was a movie that cost $150 million to make, made $375 million at the box office. A box office success, but not like a runaway box office success. I think Mad Max Fury Road was very successful on home video. It got a traditional like Blu-ray release and sold a lot of like Blu-rays between fall and Christmas. I found the number for it. It's kind of sort of a hard thing to like quantify across the various releases, but an estimated like $50 million of additional revenue in home video, kind of, I think, at the tail end of home video's relevance. Yeah. I don't even think a big Blu-ray push is part of revenue plans for
at this point, it's for people who love physical media.
Yeah, it's just for,
You're archivist at this point.
Fury Road was a successful movie by all accounts. I was a little bit surprised. I was like, oh, Fury Road didn't make $50 billion worldwide. We didn't all watch it over and over and over again. But
I believe it opened second to the acapellas, the whatever that one.
Pitch Perfect 2.
Pitch Perfect 2.
It was the same weekend.
Yeah, and they were about, both of them were over 50 million, and I think Pitch Perfect 2 just got a little bit more money. Yeah. But it was very close, but still it opened second.
I definitely went to go see both. I know. But Furiosa cost $168 million to make and had a global box office of $173 million. And I think this is just something we talk about from time to time in these discussions is if you make $175 million globally at the box office and your movie isn't successful, it's like just a problem of production scale. I think there should be a range for movies to make $200 million worldwide and that be a financial success.
Yeah. But just given the price, and I will say, $168 million to make Furiosa is they were using their money wisely.
Oh nowadays. That's like it's half of the budget of a comparable action film. Yeah. So like it's not even that it's like this enormous bloated production. It is a lean, mean action movies by modern standards.
And I mean it also like it was Fury Road was a hit, but it might have just been in the top 10 or top 15 or top 20 box office films that year. A lot of your Marvel films, Star Wars, Jurassic Park, a lot. And it was that time during a lot of these kind of sequels and reboots or legacy sequels that were coming out. So there was obviously a lot of nostalgia going on in 2015 for a time that once was or perhaps never was. But yeah, it was the same thing. The same thing earlier that summer. There was The Fall Guy, which I think was a delightful movie, but it also greatly underperformed at the box office. And it was a fun film that more people should do. Like, I want to go see a fun movie and take something that takes advantage of this big wide screen. And both of them kind of underperformed greatly.
Yeah, yeah. Why do you think Furiosa underperforms?
Okay, there's a lot of
That's a huge speculative question for film fans. Because I think it is a hotly anticipated movie. And I think it is because there is a large fan base of people with affection for Fury Road, even more so than its box office returns would indicate. Like, there are a lot of people, I think, who discovered Fury Road later. In the ensuing 9 years, there are people who, like, grew in affection for that film, maybe even if they weren't represented in box office numbers initially. And, like, Furiosa is the next one. And why do you think? What do you think?
Oh, there's so many things to consider. I mean, one thing too is while I think visually Furiosa has a fair amount, I think it's doing its own thing, but every Mad Max film used to be under an hour and 40 minutes, if that. And then Mad Max Fury Road was about 2 hours. And Furiosa is 2.5 hours.
Oh, yeah, it is a longer one.
So you're going to miss a whole screening with that amount of length if you're showing a 2.5 hour, which is a strategy a lot of studios do. They make their films run, because I think Wicked's going to be like 2 hours and 40 minutes, and apparently it's just the first half of Wicked. So, you're going to take up so many screens that other studios can't have because they can only show like 3 or 4 screenings a day of that almost 3-hour film.
Yeah, yeah. That is interesting. I never thought about that strategy of you're just eating up real estate.
Yeah.
Oh, that must be why they do it. Because I always think the length of movies, of pushing a movie past 2.5 hours, is against the premise of selling a lot of tickets. Because you're right, it's just mathematically you can't show it 6 times a day.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's longer, so there's less opportunities, and that box office window is closed, tighter. Furiosa came out in May, and it was streaming in August.
Yeah.
And
because it underperformed so much, they're like, well, let's just stick it to streaming.
And audiences know that. Like, there's plenty of times I don't rush to the movie theater because I'm like, oh no, eventually.
Yeah.
I think Deadpool and Wolverine just came out on Disney Plus this week. Yeah. That was a movie I skipped to the box office. I wanted to see it. I was curious about it, but I was like, I'm not gonna make a trip. Yeah. I'm just gonna wait.
We made a trip. We were like, we've got. I'd been so bummed at a lot of superheroes. I think this should be fun, and it was, and it has a degree of closure. It's definitely late stage parodic phase of the superhero film.
But I think in a different, older, long forgotten world, I would have been like, well, I have to pick one of these Saturdays to see Deadpool and Wolverine, or I won't see it for a year.
Yeah.
And I think that affects movies. Obviously, all movies are affected by that. The big question I carried into it, for me personally, is I think a failing in me, it's like a personal pet peeve of me as a viewer that does not, it's unfair way I treat stories. I do not like prequels. And there's something about prequel story structure that I find deeply unsatisfying. Yeah. Because it either has to end in a way that you know, so when you buy the ticket, you know the end of the movie, or it has to end in a way that makes you, it changes something very important about a story you already have affection for, because to surprise you at the end of the movie, they had to change an element of the story as it exists. So I just remember sitting down for Furiosa and being like, oh, I don't like prequels, but I do love Furiosa. And I just remember being so obsessed with her hand, because I was like, okay, she's going to lose her hand, and it's either at the end of the first half hour or before the last half hour. Those are the 2 moments in this movie where she can lose her hand. And I already know that at 28 minutes in this movie, her hand is going to be going towards a spinning blade, or at 2 hours into this movie, her hand is going to be thrust into a spinning blade. Yeah. And I was like, I just remember that bumming me out, where I was like, with Fury Road, I never knew what was going to happen next. And I was like, I feel this movie's boxed in already by it being a prequel.
I often think it's prequels kind of basically lead you to starting positions of the film that you enjoyed more. Yeah. So okay, everybody's in their starting positions. Like later in the film, we see Furiosa get the Charlize Theron type haircut that Furiosa does, although it seems to be decades, 15, 20 years. in the past. She's just not going to change her. She's not going to change her hairstyle. And it all of this kind of setup that it remind one thing a prequel that annoyed the hell out of me. I guess it's technically a midquel is the solo Star Wars story where like there are all these things I don't really care about. Like how did Han Solo get his gun? How did Han Solo get his name? How did Han Solo get an inherently mysterious character? You don't need to, I think about like somebody like, if you've ever watched The Wire, Michael Kenneth Williams' character in that. He's like this legendary like predator, and he steals from drug dealers, Omar from The Wire. And I really don't want to know the past of Omar. I don't want to see him as a little kid. Also the same thing, and not to just berate the prequels, but did I really want to see Darth Vader as a whiny little kid? Not really. No.
Yeah, I always struggle with that idea of prequels. I know they are very popular and people like them, and I can get on board with a prequel and have a great time just appreciating his movie. Like that Solo movie, I think does have those moments like, like we're making jokes about how he got his name. But I did find it a really exciting action movie, and I liked the character of Han Solo, and I liked exploring it with a new actor. Seemed exciting to me personally. But like, I think there is this thing about stories where I love the character Furiosa, and I'm not as curious about how she came to be as I am infinitely curious about what's next. Like she's being tugged up into the Citadel, watching Mad Max ride off into the sunset at the end of the movie, and what happens when she gets up there? What happens next? And I think a prequel always frustrates me in that way, where it's like, hold tight, we're going to get you to where we were.
Yeah, I mean, it screams of a word our fellow colleague Walter Squire, risk averse. Okay, we'll give you an aesthetic and a world that you're familiar with. That did you like this first one? Well, here's something that happened a little bit beforehand. And it feels very fan fictiony. Not that there's anything wrong with fan fiction, but when you're a big studio, it's one thing if you're into fan fiction and you read it online. It's another thing to get someone to go see your movie in the theater.
And I am very curious as if that, for some films, if that suppresses their popularity in terms of like, I'm going to rush out this weekend and buy tickets to a movie. Because I do think a lot of movies that are released in the current climate feel like homework for another movie.
Yeah.
Where you're like, I just want to go see a movie. I don't want to fill in the blanks for a movie that came out 9 years ago. I'll skip this one. And I feel like our culture, our movie ticket purchasing culture is getting exhausted by that.
Let's get this kind of almost like hyperlink thing. Like it's like surfing the web. You link to this, to this. You get to this website and read this to get to that thing. And I generally thought for many years, like Marvel Cinematic Universe films did a good job. Like they tell their story and then they tack on the things in the end credit or the mid credit scene. But yeah, when the film just becomes the advert for the next film, that seems very, but I think in Furiosa tells a complete story and about all this other crazy stuff that was happening beforehand, and we kind of know how Furiosa became who Furiosa was. And I think she's a character that lends herself to having more stories about her. I don't think that about I'm not one of these people like you. There's some movie and there's an interesting side character. Like, we should give that side character their own movies. Like, not really. That character's cool. But when they have conflict, when they have to not be cool, that's going to be like, you're not going to like that character as much.
Sometimes I think it's good for things to just be in my imagination.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. But like, even with that feeling that like, okay, I maybe don't like prequels, and maybe that's a me problem. I should not take that to the movie theater with me all the time. Once the movie got going, I was like, oh, this is an engaging story. I am curious about it, and like I remember very early on with like the motorcycle chase, where I was like, oh, what a cool concept for a chase, about how it's really communicating to me how far the distance is.
Yeah.
And about how it's rates of speed and competing rates of speed, and trying to very minusculely change your rate of speed against the person you're chasing, because you have to catch them in time.
Yeah, it's an it's an interesting kind of inversion of the let's drive as fast, hell bent for leather, let's drive as fast as we can, of all the other ones, where It's a bit more of a cat and mouse, like someone's shooting at us. Let's hide under this hill of sand, see where they're coming, and try to avoid them. So it feels much more tactical.
Yeah.
You know, these are people that they just have motorcycles. They're on their own, and they're not a horde or a gang. So you can see I think you can see already like how someone like Furiosa was trained differently to think more about the long game than like, how do I get out of this situation as the Marauder?
Yeah.
I need to shoot a shotgun in somebody's face.
And even still in that first sequence, like the first 20 minutes of that movie, there's this shot where one of the Marauders gets shot and comes off of his motorcycle and goes full face, fills the full frame of the thing before it cut. And I was like, oh man, George Miller still knows how to think of these pictures. Yeah.
You feel the impact. And a lot. I mean, it's an R-rated action film. First off, so they won't like cut away so we don't see the violence, which I think it fetishizes the violence, but if you make the violence less violent, then you're making it more whimsical. Or I'm not got the right words here, but you see the gravity of the violence when you show it. And I think oftentimes they say like PG-13 movies are more violent, more people die in PG-13 movies, more explosions, because they don't highlight the violence as much. And it kind of
there's a lot of violence in these Mad Max movies, but the violence hurts and it's visceral, and there are consequences to it. And there is, like, I think always a sense of mourning to the violence. Like, the characters wish the world was not this violent.
Yeah.
And they wish that that's not how they had to survive. And I always think that that's, like, the point of the Mad Max movies. And then also the fact that it's really exciting to watch is,
and I think
benefit.
And I think, too, with something like Fury Road, there's the more mindfulness of, like, the depiction of women and their struggles and their fight to have bodily autonomy from someone like a Morton Joe, who will lock you away in his vault of special gifts if you're healthy and good looking.
Have you ever heard Penn Jillette talk about violence?
No. No.
Penn and Jillette from Penn and Teller is a magician, and their magic act is very violent. Like there's lots of fake blood and like dismemberment and acts of violence on the stage. And when people ask him about that, does his show glorify violence, he has a very thoughtful philosophical opinion about it. Is violence is abhorrent to him. He hates violence, and he uses violence on stage very specifically because it's fake. There are not consequences to it. And it's a visceral experience that lets you experience violence, and then at the end of it, he is okay. And he says that's a celebration of life, is that we went through it, and at the end of it, I'm okay. And that reinforces the idea that violence is in life and that it is the enemy. And I think that a lot about violent movies. I could see someone saying, I don't like violent movies. I don't like seeing violent images. It's viscerally upsetting to me. With a movie like this, that's what I think is, okay, I endured a lot of violence, but everyone is okay. I'm okay. It was all imaginary, and everyone bowed figuratively at the end.
Yeah.
And we are celebrating that that's what happened.
Yeah.
Because in life, violence is unavoidable, and it changes you. But in the movies, it does not change you.
I think I remember once Teller went to like a Shakespeare camp, like a Shakespeare teacher's camp. That was part of a job. And I guess Teller did he did all the special effects for the play Macbeth, which has a lot of stage stuff in it, puppet, all sorts of things. And anyway, at the end of Macbeth gets his head chopped off, and there's his head. And then we're like, he's dead. And then there comes the actor that's Macbeth going out to take a bow. It reminded me of something. I was actually showing recently at my film class the film Predator. It's part of my 80s action films, and it's such a grim ending. You see Schwarzenegger, he's killed the Predator, but he looks like he's got so much PTSD and exhaustion. And then they go to that kind of 80s, like, let's introduce the characters and see them smile on their faces. And it feels a little bit like that bow at the end of the play. We're like, we're all okay. We're all alive. This was all make-believe. And I think as opposed to something like nudity and foul language, it is something that is the most make-believe of those kind of things that rate a film on.
Yeah.
Although nowadays they can do things like CGI people's heads onto nude bodies and things like that. So it's the CGIing of erotica in cinema. So it takes, I guess people, they don't want to do it, then they'll just find a body double and things like that.
There's a point in my personal journey through Furiosa, a movie I anticipated, was excited about, and I believe I put too much personal pressure on to be Fury Road, which was a movie I just love. So I shouldn't say you're not like the one I like. But I remember after about 20, 30 minutes into the movie, sitting in my chair, getting this distinct feeling, oh, I don't like this one as much. And I was trying to put my finger on it. And I think one effect is something you talked about briefly at the beginning is the way rehashes, remakes, modern movies in that style are taking the aesthetics of something you already like and just kind of dressing it up again for a second go.
Yeah.
And one thing I really appreciated about Fury Road was it was showing me things I'd never seen before in my entire life with a look I'd never seen before. And when I went back to Furiosa, I was like, oh, it's just those things again.
Yeah. I think more than any, there is a recircling back to the aesthetics. And a lot of all those characters that died in Fury, hey, it's like a Quentin Tarantino movie. They're back.
Yeah.
You know, they are still alive earlier in the story than later in the story. And it's interesting. It has that. I think it's one thing. I think narratively, it's doing something different because we have a character, unlike Max, who does not care and does not want to get involved, but ends up getting involved. Furiosa cares. She values the people she grew up with. She values wanting to keep the green place safe. And as she grows, she values wanting to save Immortan Joe's women they're enslaved women.
Yeah. But just from the look of it, I was like, I've seen this stuff, and I want to have an emotional experience. I'm not making an FAQ about the Bullet Farm. When I feel like sometimes stories get bogged down in that. Or one of the things I liked about Fury is I never saw inside the Bullet Farm. It was just a word and a character from there.
The guy that had the bullet, he represented the Bullet Farm. And we get to see what the Bullet Farm is.
And I didn't go inside and learn how it worked. It was just this thing on the edge of my imagination where I was like, what is that? What does that even mean? But maybe that's something that I am judging the movie unfairly for. Because when Furiosa is on the screen, when I'm looking at the images, I love the characters, I'm interested in the characters, and I'm excited by the thing about it. And then in the back of my mind, I'm like, that's not as good as that one I really love, though.
I mean, I think I always feel like it's kind of like, if it's particularly a movie that you love or a series that you love, it's like when a band puts out a new album, and it's that question of, you're not gonna like it the first time you hear it, and whether you're going to like it, or you're like, they've lost it, they've lost all their verve, they've lost all their mojo. I think about that when I watch whenever I watch a Quentin Tarantino film after the Kill Bills, I'm like, did I like that or not? And then I watched it again. I was like, oh yes, no, some of his things, he certainly has issues and problems, but as a filmmaker, he's just fantastic in the way he gets actors and all the cinematic elements he uses. He's just fantastic in it. And then I just will watch it and be like, this is great. This is great. This is great. This little scene or this little interaction is fantastic. Yeah. And I could tell you why. And watching it again, I felt a similar kind of feel, like an appreciation of how good the filmmaking is. Yeah. Despite its lack of innovation and change up from the other, aside from the narrative.
Yeah, there are action sequences in it that are better than Fury Road, cooler than Fury Road. And I find myself disconnected from them because I'm like, well, it's like the same props from Fury Road doing cooler stuff. And that's my fault, I think, not the movie's fault.
Yeah. And it is, I think, rhythm-wise, it is a different, whereas Fury Road is like chaos. I remember the assault on the war rig that were the one that Furiosa is trying to escape on. It feels much more logical, and you've got to do this, and you've blown a hose. You've got to fix this, and I really think these were the best war boys. Yeah, these were trained, dedicated, would die for their brothers war boys, and the war boys we see in Fury Road are not as good. But also that all these guys die. And you see that loss, but they're just the best at being sold. The kind of classic. their job is to do and not ask why. And
Yeah.
they really are the kind of army you would want to have. But also they fight bravely and then they die. So
Yeah. Furiosa, I think when I watch it, I think if you hooked a supercomputer up to my brain and the computer printed out whether or not I like the movie based on its measurement of what was happening in my mind, it would say, you loved that movie. And then I would say, I didn't really like it that much. And I think that is, that's what I think about Furiosa is I think you're blocking yourself from enjoying it.
Yeah. Do I do that myself?
Yeah, I think, yeah.
I wonder. I mean, it is, I don't know. I think maybe I always wonder, like sometimes maybe it's like, because I'm almost like, I want you to like this film. So maybe like take some time off. Don't think about post-apocalyptic films, despite the way the world is now, and just kind of then pick it up at some point in the future. Like, yeah, you know what? I do like this film.
Yeah, I anticipate that as time goes on, my affection for Furiosa will grow. And like as I revisit it over the years, there'll be a point in time where I'm like, you were out of your mind in 2024. This is a cool movie.
But also, I'm not a therapist, but be true to your emotions and reactions that you have. It doesn't mean, obviously, it's the kind of thing like you just study and talk, you make film, you talk about film, like we respect your thoughts and perspective without a doubt. But also, just that we see things at a certain time and that often affects us, and maybe we'll feel differently. Maybe I'll think it's total trash whenever I watch it again, and we'll be kind of on the opposite sides of this conversation. Who knows? So
one thing when I was interested in when I was looking at the box office success of the all the Mad Max films kind of at one glance is that the like Road Warrior, Beyond Thunderdome, and Mad Max were very successful financial films, and that Fury Road was a movie I thought was more financially successful than it was. And I was curious about this, and I don't know why it never mattered to me. But do you think that audiences, it matters that Mel Gibson is not in these new movies?
I think it was an issue before Fury Road but also it'd been so many years, and there was a lot of deserved bad press that Mel Gibson had brought upon himself. And he had become a big star and he'd kind of grown out of that role by the time Lethal Weapon that made solidified his fame, and he kind of mixed the kind of more comical aspects as an actor. So, and it just I think I came around. I was like, okay, what's his name all of a sudden? I can't remember his name again. He was the Mad Max in the fourth one.
You said it. I know it. I knew it before you said it. But I think he gives a great performance in Fury Road.
Yeah.
And also I think, like, to me, Mad Max, the character, is so beside the point of Fury Road.
Yeah.
The Fury Road is a movie that makes me forget about Mel Gibson. Like, I maybe going into Fury Road, I was like, oh, it's weird that this is kind of like a Mel Gibson movie without Mel Gibson. And then when I watched it, I was like, I do not remember Mel Gibson. I only like Fury Road. Fury Road is everything.
I think it's a little bit like thinking about like James Bond films, and basically there's been one family. At one time there were two producers, and then the family of one of those has basically made all the proper Eon James Bond films. So there's that integrity of it, that the same filmmakers and family has been making these kind of films for 50 plus years.
Yeah.
And so then you have so they have to break in a new actor to play James Bond, and sometimes it takes some time, and sometimes they hit it off, but you just kind of go with it. And there's just a particular strength that actor will bring. In the case of our new one, he's very mumbly, as is very much a signature of his performances. And I suddenly cannot remember his name.
Tom Hardy.
Tom Hardy, yes, Tom Hardy. Lovely.
I had to clear my mind of all other information.
I'm bad. I need to put these things down on this whole 5 pages of stuff I write down. But
But looking back at like how successful financially, those early Mad Max, particularly that first one, which I was maybe unaware of how enormously financially successful that movie was. In 1979, coming out of Australia with a budget of $350,000 to be that globally successful, that Mel Gibson was a special box office attraction in the 1980s.
Yeah.
A real, genuine face on the movie poster movie star.
Yeah.
And maybe, I was thinking, does it suppress our interest or excitement in Furiosa that it doesn't have Charlize Theron in it?
I think that does. I think that, I mean, she's the one that made the role so distinctive.
Yeah.
And also, like, apparently it is very, like, this is a film that takes a lot out of its stars. And so they're like, I need to take some time. I need to take some time off, and I need to do something else, and I don't want to talk about this film.
Yeah.
I think apparently that was what Anya Taylor-Joy had said in interview. I might be able to tell you about this film in 15 to 20 years. So it seems like no matter what, however nice anyone can be, this sounds like a film that's going to be a rough shoot for everybody.
Yeah, I think both the Fury Road and Furiosa were difficult movies.
Yeah.
They are in the desert with gasoline automobiles on all the time.
I think it's just all these cars rolling and just the noise from trying to make it. Which I assume they post, even with that, they have to like post sync all that stuff later.
You had to be so physically uncomfortable constantly.
Yeah. And it was a lot. And I think it's kind of the thing where someone is so distinctive and iconic, like Charlize Theron is, that it's hard to put somebody else in that. Like it's like, would you want I don't know, like we're gonna have a different actress play Ripley in the Alien films.
Yes.
It's like I don't know if I'm ready for that.
I think that is a thing about film that we experiment with all the time, is the belief that we can take the mantle of a character and have another actor perform. Like James Bond is the great example.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, that works with James Bond. But like really, Sean Connery inhabits that role. It belongs to him, and it has been passed down through the generations. And for some reason, that's the one that works. But I do think we do not have an affection for a character. We have an affection for a performer.
Yeah.
And if you try to pass it around, it loses some of the magic.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. And I think, too, going back to something like James Bond, it's like little things, because, like, in Sean Connery's James Bond, he smoked cigarettes, but Roger Moore did not smoke cigarettes, but he smoked cigars. And they're just all these little things that the film wanted that particular actor to, parts of their own personality to inhabit and give them that flexibility. And as the film goes along, they obviously have a say in the character, so there's like a proprietary thing with the filmmakers and the actor. But yeah, it is a little, with that, it's a little bit like someone makes a big footprint, and no matter who it is, if Meryl Streep took over the Furiosa role, I'm just like, I mean, she wouldn't do it, but I think she wouldn't do it as look at how iconic that one person is. I mean, one example also is when Carrie Fisher died, and they decided we're not going to recast Princess Leia in the Star Wars films, and then whatever they did with the used footage, the deleted footage wasn't very good either. But it's just like that person is so associated with that role, we can't put anybody else in it. And this is a film that tries to do that, which I give them credit for that.
Yeah,
but it's
Anna Taylor-Joy does a great job.
Yeah,
she is a great and interesting character. Maybe that's a feeling I have when I watch this movie is, what if this was just an Anna Taylor-Joy movie, and you didn't give her that baggage of connecting to the other story? It's her surviving in the desert. Would I like the movie more?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not speaking for you, but yeah, I think you're right. I mean, and two, back in the days when this film was big, there were tons of Mad Max ripoffs that involved sword. You know, there was a Patrick Swayze Steel Dawn, and there was Solar Baby. They were like they were all trying to do some sort of variation of post-apocalyptic, it's a desert Mad Max type stuff.
Do you like the desert in Cars?
Yeah, people love the desert in Cars. All that dust kicks up. It's great. And so, you know, back in the days, you just make, if something was a successful film, you just make a clone of it with Chuck Norris in it, they made Rambo, so Schwarzenegger had to make Commando. So something that is in competition and borrows a lot from the one man army kind of movies and things like that. So I don't. But now I think it's so much when obviously corporations were taking over film studios by starting in the 60s and the 70s, but now just having that kind of synergy of here's an intellectual property and how we use it, and it's just something that again, they're risk averse. But it's like, okay, Anya Taylor-Joy's character name, Judy Darkstar or something is riding the wasteland or something. I would have been just fine with that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And you could have had someone who's kind of like Immortan Joe. Yeah, it works. But it's that proprietariness, and studios sue if you're making something too much like something else, even if it would stand up in court. Now they're just suing you because they can try to stop you from doing it. So
yeah, I just predict my affection for Furiosa will grow.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think we'll get another Mad Max movie? It seems unlikely to me.
It seems unlikely. I think
from George Miller.
Yeah, I think George Miller was planning it, but I think the lack of success from this kind of hurt that, which is a shame.
And he does take a long break between them.
Yeah, well, he made a film between this, and he's made things like Happy Feet, and he was basically the producer behind the first Babe film, and then he directed Babe, Pig in the City, the Witches of Eastwick. He
directed the Witches of Eastwick. I forgot.
He's done other films.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. George Miller. Very successful director by any metric.
Very versatile in terms of genre and style.
Yeah, you can direct The Road Warrior and Babe. Like, that's a special talent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We did Babe. He did Babe, Pig in the City, but he produced.
He produced Babe. Yeah.
Yeah. He was probably really involved in Babe. I feel like that's got the George Miller touch to it. I also think this is something I noticed about one of the actors in the film. Really, probably the most popular actor is Chris Hemsworth, and it seems, without fail, it's one of my notes, is that Chris Hemsworth will play a character in a female-led tentpole Hollywood film that will underperform, and it's just a way to showcase his range as an actor, and we see him in a different way, and he often is the primary beneficiary of that. I remember the Ghostbusters. This 2016 Ghostbusters.
He was in that movie. I do not remember that.
He plays the really dumb secretary guy. I mean, he is like an idiot in the film. And he'd done funny stuff in things like Thor and the Avengers, but he really shows like how goofy and dumb, like I'm handsome, but I'm like an idiot. And then he ultimately gets possessed by this other guy. He just gets possessed by the evil force in that movie. It's like a toad at home commenting on the internet. I did not like the 2016 Ghostbusters movie, but I saw it twice in the theater, and I wanted to like it. And I know some people do, but I'm just like, I didn't like that film at all. But Chris Hemsworth showed that he had greater comic range than he initially implied, and that led to like, okay, let's give him more to do in Thor Ragnarok. And I suspect that this performance, where he plays a genuinely scary and freaky and unpredictable guy, is going to get him more villain roles, and we will see the expansion of the range of Chris Hemsworth. So, we have and I think too, there is, I think, a little bit of the whole gendered thing where you have, clearly, overtly the woman is the hero, the heroine, the main character of the film, and then Chris Hemsworth finds a way to profit on it for his career, which good for him. I'd like to see. I like Hemsworth. I'd like to see him get stuff beyond the Thor movies, because I think he's a talented actor.
Yeah.
He's a very good. He's a good movie star.
His Dementis is really fantastic. Like a really fantastic performance.
In a grand tradition of the great villains in these films. He is definitely. I'd said he kind of reminded me a bit of Colonel Kilgore from Apocalypse Now, with a little bit of Heath Ledger from The Dark Knight. Just that's a kind of the whatever mixed drink of Dementis is. It's around that. He's a terrible, terrible person.
Yeah. And really fun and interesting to watch for the whole movie. Yeah. And I think really stands out as a villain that's very different from the very excellent villains from Fury Road that are in this movie as well. Just a very different take on how do you gain power in the wasteland and what does that look like.
Yeah. I mean, he's very... I mean, in one, it is a sense of the way like I understand and appreciate a Morton Joe's way of thinking better than his. Because Dementus is basically like, there's a part where they're going to try to attack the Citadel and they're way at the bottom and everybody's up at the top of this. It was like, he's basically saying like, you people are being taken advantage. You people are being taken advantage of. He's keeping you poor. Just follow me and we will get more for everyone. And it's just like, yeah. And you listen to it and I don't believe a word he is saying, giving everything else he's done up to that point that I've seen. But he is just an agent. He like thrives on chaos and not being good at his job, at being a leader. Where, say what you will, a Morton Joe thinks and plans, and it has a sense of wanting to have a legacy and to continue it on. Whereas we don't know what's in Dementus's mind, but he's clearly capable of taking over things. But he's not very good at maintaining them.
Oh yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought it quite that way. Is like a Morton Joe uses the wasteland as an opportunity to hoard resources and generate wealth for himself and cement his power because I have the resources. Yeah. Here is just water for some reason. It's in that thing. And Dementus is much more about I use the wasteland as an opportunity for anarchy to sow chaos and use chaos and violence as a way to stay at the center of power. Yeah. Because I can just disrupt anything because I have my war band with me.
Yeah, and he fundamentally doesn't believe in anything, whereas, say what you will about a Morton Joe, he gives people something to believe in. He gives the war boys, like you get your spray and go to Valhalla. You've died as a worthy war boy.
Isn't water more special because I have it all?
Yeah.
Don't you appreciate it more because I have so much? And if I give you a drop, aren't you more grateful?
Yeah.
Don't become addicted to water.
Yeah. And also, you need water for other things. You need water to grow plants, and he's growing the potatoes and the cabbages and things like that. So he's using the water to make other things. I guess in business they would call you value added. It's not just getting the water; he's making other things that are more valuable than the water. Whereas Bullet Town just makes bullets, and Gas Town just makes gas, which is gone. You shoot it, the bullet's gone. You drive over the desert like a mad person, you're going to run out of gas at some point. So he's thinking about the future, and he obviously wants a son who is not a sociopath or super creepy. Clearly, he keeps failing that. He's got Rictus and Scrotus there. What a name to be Scrotus.
I think that is a fantastic observation about the Fury Road and Furiosa. It is a movie where there is a character named Scrotus, and that is awesome.
Yes. And he's somehow not the most reprehensible character in the movie.
Yeah. And it's a completely earned, when you look at him, you're like, yeah, that's Scrotus. Scrotus. That's his name. That's the only name. He can only have the name Scrotus.
Yes, Scrotus. He's very prone to war. He's like, let's go fight him right now. And his dad is clearly Morton Joe's clearly a little more strategic about things. So, and I to me that's in addition. The interesting thing is the dynamics. I guess it's the world building and the dynamics, and it makes me sound like I'm really into fantasy novels, and I do enjoy them. But I do think the world building in this film is much more detailed than the previous films. But we're going through it so fast. Where this is one where we actually slow down much more.
It is about sort of like box checking and explaining. But one thing I still admire about this movie and the Mad Max films in general is that it has a style of world building where it gives you evidence of a large world. And that exists in your imagination. Mm-hmm. You have to imagine it because, like you said, it's moving so fast through the things. And I always like that about the Mad Max movies where it's like, what has happened? There's some more questions than answers in all of them.
And two, a lot of this stuff is told visually, which I think is something we should never. People who make films should never forget. If you can tell it visually, tell it that way. And where you have to say something through dialogue, just say what's essential and not explain everything. Concision. We don't need so much exposition. What do you need to know? What can you show visually?
Yeah. Well, I do not ever need it explained in dialogue or text why the war boys spray paint their teeth.
Yeah.
It is awesome, and it is very clear that is a passionate belief of theirs.
It's a very sacred
that
thing.
They want to die with chrome on their teeth, and it just makes sense.
Do they go to Valhalla?
Yeah, it's fine. I get it. It's an awesome thing.
Yeah. And you know, and it's those kind of little details that put you in that world, and it doesn't feel forced. And yeah, I mean, it is immersive you. It is immersive experience, much more than some kind of like ride or something like that. I mean, it is a ride as a film, but you don't have to have the nausea that comes with it.
Oh yeah. So I don't know. Looking at this list of films, I guess maybe instead of like, I've been living for months like Furiosa wasn't the awesomest thing I ever saw in my entire life. Like something bad happened to me. Oh, Furiosa wasn't the awesomest thing that's ever happened to me in my entire life. I'm disappointed. But like looking at these 5 movies, like what an incredible like look at how much we got out of the wasteland out of one director's career, and look how like exciting and interesting each one is. Even the ones that people like malign are still like insane and crazy and beautiful.
I certainly thought that way when George A. Romero's first zombie films, Night, Dawn, Day. I was like, these are fantastic and they're great. And then I saw that Land of the Dead was coming out. It was the 4th Romero zombie film, and I was disappointed.
Yeah.
But then I looked at it with years later, like, this is pretty good. And there's interesting stuff in it. And what more do you expect from the guy?
Yeah. There's a certain point where you're like, it's my fault for thinking that someone could make a movie better than Dawn of the Dead. Like what? What else should a man do for me with one human lifetime?
Yeah, you've done. You've made classics. You should be proud.
You made Dawn of the Dead,
and to a certain extent, you should be able to do what you want to do.
Yeah.
Also I think it's the. Depending on to what extent, and I think, it's something that feels very like this is the smart move in terms of making sure you make money for your film, but also it just certainly seems a passion of George Miller's, and I think that's important. There's been a lot of those like Kevin Costner making his westerns. There was the Megalopolis film with Francis Ford Coppola, like people wanting to make these kind of passion projects, and good or bad, we should at least try to see them and appreciate them and try to understand what they're doing, even if they fail terribly at it. And that people who have made good films before. But I think certainly, still, I think the quality is very high with Furiosa. I mean, he wasn't. He's thinking about the audience. He cares what we think. He's not contemptuous of us.
Definitely a movie designed to entertain. Yeah. Like entertainment first, in all of these Mad Max movies is like. I think something I admire about them.
Yeah, he doesn't get he doesn't get stuck up his own butt.
Yeah.
Reflections, and he's full of himself. So he always feels like a filmmaker, and I think because some of his films haven't been as successful, is that he's always he's always hungry. He's always got something to prove. Even in his I think he's in his 80s now or getting near that. That he's always got something to prove, and I think that's all we can ask from our artist, is just to do things that they want to do and give a full effort in them. So any other final thoughts that we have on?
I think that's a good discussion of Mad Max. It was interesting to me to reflect on Mad Max. Mad Max is something, it's always on the periphery of my major league fandom, where I'm like, oh yeah, Mad Max is cool, but it's not my favorite thing in the entire world. But now that I reflect on it, I'm like, maybe I should give more attention to Mad Max movies.
It's not the one, like, you generally don't have action figures. You don't have it is the films themselves. They're not like, here's the Mad Max theme park.
That's a good point.
Although I wouldn't mind a Mad Max theme park. I think that would be pretty interesting. One thing that I think strikes me very false and screams of studio interference is that they the way that the film proper ends is the perfect way to end. We look like we've got ahead, and then there's Furiosa that looks more like Charlize Theron going and leading Immortan Joe's women to freedom. And then we see the credits, and we start seeing clips from Mad Max.
Oh yeah,
Fury
I forget
Road.
It closes with the credits
from the clips. And the last credit is the last scene from Fury Road is of Furiosa crying in the sand, like the green place is gone. I'm dejected. That is just such a false note to run on that, because in the prequel, she has hope that it's still there. And in Fury Road, she still believes it's there. And now she's going to take herself and some people to the green place. And I think that just really is a false note to end on the film. That is something that is kind of, she's determined, she's going to fight, she's going to save other people than herself to get away from Immortan Joe in this kind of very dysfunctional, dystopic world. So I feel like I was like, I should have just walked out right of the theater. Where I was like, okay, no need to watch, because I do tend to watch credits anyway. And it's like, no, not this. This really strikes a fault.
Oh yeah, I had just forgotten about that sequence.
So in my head canon, I just try to dismiss that, but I think that is just a bad move on everyone's part. So, but yeah, this is not going to be as good. It's not going to be as good as a Fury Road, and I don't know if it's as good as The Road Warrior, but it's still a great film as far as I'm concerned. I loved it. I enjoyed it. I will check it periodically. So
yeah, if I continue to demand that movies be as good as The Road Warrior and Fury Road, it's hard to enjoy anything.
Maybe we should watch some really bad, some Uwe Boll films, some later Fast and the Furious entries, just a little something, just to get you in the mood, and then you see something good. Maybe those some of the later era direct-to-video Chuck Norris films. The one where he's like a cop partner with his dog, Top Dog. Yeah, just something. Maybe you just been watching too many good films lately.
You'll appreciate The Wasteland if you.
So, all righty. Well, thank you very much. Have a good one wherever you are, and stay safe out there.